supernatural is something that isn't supposed to happen, but it does happen.
And no nation which expects to be the leader of other nations can expect to stay behind in this race for space.
What does it take to convince you that the dead do not always rest in peace?
Welcome to the Three Beards podcast. This episode has been brought to you by Rod's Beard Care, premium beard oil designed especially by gentleman Kelly Brott here in Central Florida area, Winter Garden. All natural, essential oils, amazing stuff for the beard. We have our own signature blend that we work together. Go support Kelly at rotsbeardcare.com. Use promo code 3beards with a capital B, and you're going to save 20% off. At this time, we have a very special guest with us. I put it on Facebook post. I'm trying to think the best way to do it other than just comic book history guru, all together pop culture. I mean, we're talking about a man who knows his stuff. Mr. Arlen Schumer. Just to give you guys anybody that doesn't know, here's a man who, for all I could say, he is the comic book nerd that all of us strive to be. He is.
I've never once described myself as a nerd.
Yeah.
Because when I grew up, I'm older than you guys. Those words were pejoratives.
That's true. So he was. Let's just say. I mean, I got the privilege because he was extremely generous. Let me in to see his webinar that just took place today on the amazing work of Ditko, and that you want to talk about somebody that, I mean, if we had 5-6 hours to go, we could just let him loose, and by the time we're done, we're like, man, I don't think he took a breath. He just goes, and it's not like, okay, hold on a second, let me flip through my notes. It's right there in my head. He's flipping through books.
Notes? We don't need no stinking notes.
Exactly. And so basically,
it's all about here, baby. It's all about love. It's all about sharing the love.
Yeah. So he has a book out as well, which I want to get to you in this episode. It's Visions, the Silver Age of comic book art. There's that one, and then he also has one, Visions of the Twilight Zone, which is
out of print, but you could still find copies on eBay. Yep. Not eBay, Amazon. They're linked to the secondhand book sites. But look, if you get the hardcover, underneath the dust jacket, this is the very first image I can recall seeing as a child, the Twilight Zone eyeball in outer space. And then I end up becoming an adult, an artist, and I do the only coffee table art book about the Twilight Zone, and I emboss the image on the cover as if to say, thank you, Rod Serling.
Yep, it's
the surrogate father I never had. My mother was a widow. She raised my brother and I by herself. My father died when I was 4 months old. I found all of my pop culture father figures. I found my father figures in the pop culture. Serling, Sean Connery, my first cinematic image. I'm 5 years old. My mother takes my brother and I to see Dr. No at a drive-in. And that's my first and I don't have a father. It's like, come on, Shane. It's come back, Sean Connery. But my point is, and then the superheroes that I read in the comics as a kid that are all behind me in my studio. And then eventually Bruce Springsteen was more of still kind of a father figure, even though he's only 9 years older than me. But I found my father figures in the American pop culture that I ended up regurgitating back in the form of art. Nice. There's my book.
And that's
in the form of art, really, whether it's I'm a commercial artist, but I treat the art that I do as a fine artist would. It's my art. All art is art. You know, I think Andy Warhol said fine art is commercial art and commercial art is fine art. It's all art.
Exactly. That's
you know, people think because you're not an artist in a garret and you could be a commercial artist that you don't put your personality in your work. You know, Jack Kirby said every character he ever drew, and he literally drew thousands, was a reflection of him, like the facets on a disco ball, on a diamond. Mm-hmm. Every line you make, whether you know it or not, whether you articulate it or not, every line you make, whether it's fine art or commercial art, it doesn't matter. It's a reflection of everything you are. You can't help it. The girl can't help it.
Yeah.
Esoteric pop reference. The girl can't help it. Famous late 50s rock and roll movie directed by Frank Tashlin, who directed Martin Lewis comedies. And he was a commercial artist turned film director. Ergo, the movie, which features early rock and roll hits by Little Richard and Jerry Lee Lewis and Chuck Berry.
I think you're going to have to let him off the hook.
Okay. I'm just saying, that's the way my mind works. What can I tell you?
Well, and that was the thing when I was describing like the webinar. That's how it is. I mean, you start off, you know, I'm trying to bring up one of the images here, you know, to show, and that was one I was trying to get, you know, where I don't have it ready at the hand here, but it's like this, you know.
Ginger, I thought you were the producer here. Get that image up.
I don't know what he's talking about. I have a whole thing set up. I don't think it's what he's looking for, though.
I'll try to locate it, but it's like,
what is it?
We'll talk the
and Chris, this is like the Three Stooges. Chris, what role do you play? Are you Curly? Are you Mo? Or are you Larry?
I'm the shenanigator.
I think he's like a Larry. Craig, I think you're the Mo. Ginger, you're definitely Curly.
I was looking through this. I love this.
This is the Larry.
I love this. Yep. The highest superhero, Dr. Cannabis.
Yeah, you like that? Look at my origin, the middle image. If you can click on that and, you know, go to it, like, yeah. I mean, that's my origin of Dr. Cannabis. He's a scientist, purposely made him look like Clark Kent. And he figures out a way to synthesize human DNA with, like, the greatest sativa.
That's amazing.
Who knows how this actually works? And then he, like, hooks it up to some machines. That's the middle left panel. Listen, I'm making all this up while I'm smoking a fat one. What can I tell you? Basically, he merges his like life force, his DNA with sativa, and becomes Dr. Cannabis. And he's got all the powers of sativa. And if you look at the lower left panel, he's got, like, Dr. Strange has the eye of Agamotto. He's got the, you know, Dr. Cannabis, the green light of marijuana enlightenment.
That's awesome.
And then he even comes with his own catchphrase, the last panel. Not hi, how are you? It's how high are you?
This one needs to be sold at every smoke shop.
Buying a poster or a T-shirt.
I almost feel like there needs to be like an aura coming out of his forehead.
Listen, don't get me started. I'm the Van Gogh of pop culture.
Pop culture.
Yeah, think about that. The Van Gogh of pop culture. So, Chris, are you indeed the Larry?
I think so.
Yeah, he's got two words to say. Like I said, shut up. I can't hear myself talk. Boy, Craig, you're really keeping this whole show afloat.
I'm trying. Here, I got it right there.
I don't know what the hell he does.
Yeah. All right, found the image. Steve Ditko. So everybody can see that.
Yeah, look at
that. For everybody that's watching and stuff.
Now, how did you end up with an outdated Ditko image? Where did you go to get that? That's not an image from my current webinar. That's a year ago when I did these things live in New York City.
That was your Facebook page.
Leave it to Craig. He'll find
traffic, Buster Crab.
Leave it to Craig. He'll find everything.
Yeah.
Listen, so, you know, I got a stickler for detail. I wouldn't be here today if I wasn't a perfectionist.
Yeah. For everybody that
I'm keeping a chart of all your demerits. That was a big demerit.
I'm sorry. Yeah, hey, at least I found the image I wanted.
The one you wanted.
Okay, let's move on.
Yeah.
Let's move on.
Yeah, anybody that saw that gross error of the old image, he created that. He made that whole thing. So,
but it's using existing
It's
art.
using
I'm
existing
a graphic designer, and
Yep.
I've done many what I call verbal visual essays where I use the art in a way no other graphic designer has used it, and they're like verbal visual essays. I did one about Mort Weisinger, the guy that defined Superman for the whole baby boom generation, called Requiem for Weisinger, because his work was loved by literally millions, but personally, he was the most hated man in comics.
How do you get like that?
Well, how much time you got? You want to make the rest of the session about Mort Weisinger? Mort Weisinger was like the Don Corleone of DC Comics. Do you know at the peak of the late 60s when Marvel had all the attention, do you know Jimmy Olsen and Lois Lane were outselling the best-selling Marvel comic? And if you took a look at any Jimmy Olsen or Lois Lane comic, are you kidding me? It's a station in hell. But that was the Weisinger style. It was like fast food, but it ruled DC Comics. And yet personally, and this gets into the fascinating history of 20th century comics, which is the one American art form that has not been given its Ken Burns multi-part PBS documentary. In other words, they've never come to me and given me $100 million and said, here, Arlen, go make a comic book documentary, because I think I would be able to if I had that kind of support. But all I'm saying is, we've gotten the history of movies, the history of rock and roll, the history of jazz, the history of everything in the 20th century, except the history of comics, which has, it's like the wide world of sports. It's got the thrill of victories, the agonies of defeat. Every story is like this epic saga, the Siegel and Schuster story. Two kids from Cleveland come to the big city with their big idea, which they sell for $130. The biggest ripoff to take place on Manhattan Island since Peter Stuyvesant sold it or bought it from the Indians for $26.
And beads.
Am I making my point?
Yeah, exactly. Now here, I wanted to bring up this this image too for everybody to see. This is from your webinar. This is one of the things, like in your lecture. Yes. You called this probably one of the most iconic images Steve Ditko's ever created, especially with Spider-Man. And if you talk to fans who are at the right age, in other words, we're all their own versions of Peter Parker reading Spider-Man. The average Marvel fan of 1965, it ranged from college age to whatever. But if they were reading Spider-Man by Ditko the previous year, 2 years, 3 years, this represented the apex of that genius work. And it was genius work. Ditko's Spider-Man is like nothing else in the history of comics, because that is part of what Ditko is. And yet, you wouldn't normally think Ditko would be known for an almost Michelangelo-esque sculptural image, like you're only showing sort of the top 2/3. But yeah, if you can get the whole image on, I mean, and because comics are not just single images, they are multiple images in sequence to tell a story. In my webinar, I show the buildup where you had to turn 2 pages, and then when you turn that second page, and this image, full page, that is the art of comic book storytelling. Knowing that the reader has to, building up suspense in sequential panel form. And this was the climax. And it ranks in the annals of superhero art, of which comic books, it's the main, most commercial, most popular medium, genre that the medium has produced. So within that, as a umbrella title, it's one of the greatest superheroic images ever. Now, and like I said, you're seeing it alone, like you're showing it now, is pretty powerful.
But the real way to judge it as a work of art is how it felt in your hands turning the pages and being hit by that when you didn't know it was coming.
Now, I asked this question during your show. Now, this one, because this was prior to him leaving.
Yes.
And so, do you think these words right here were kind of a nod, like I'm giving a hint that I'm out?
Okay, so I think I responded to that question. Do you remember how I responded to it?
No, that was the time when I had to log off. That's why.
How convenient! What an alibi! And I'm sure you got nobody that can back you up. I'll have to take your word for it.
Yeah.
Here's how I basically responded to that. First of all, I said that's a very keen observation because Ditko left in the fall, sometime around November of '65. This issue came out, I believe, in early '66, which means he drew it. It really brings up, you really got to start to be a real Ditko trivia buff and really find out exactly when he drew this and what was going on based on what we know from Ditko's own words of why he left in the fall of '65. Because of the way his working relationship with Lee deteriorated, which he says, if you read between Ditko's only the facts, ma'am lines, basically it doesn't make Stan Lee look good, but then don't get me started on that subject.
Yeah, and that's, cool. I'm glad I caught on that because I was just, as soon as you said that and you brought that up, I'm like, I wonder if that was intentional.
Okay, so wait. So let me answer it, whether it was intentional or not. Mm-hmm. Sometimes an artist puts his self into his work without necessarily even realizing he's doing it. In other words, this is the story Ditko was telling with Spider-Man, but because it was a reflection of his own life, he was Peter Parker. J. Jonah Jameson was Stan Lee. Ditko dropping off pages was like Parker dropping off photographs. There's a fabulous website called Dial B for Blog. And it's this guy, that unbelievable history website. And he did this whole multi-part series where image for image, he shows you that all of the Ditko Spider-Mans are basically self-reflective of Ditko's own life. He had a Flash Thompson bully when he was in high school. He had glasses like Parker. I mean, the list goes on and on. But what's really salient is that the fact that his relationship with Lee was deteriorating between 64 and 65, which coincides when he stood up to what Lee committed, the art crime of the 20th century, by not only taking writers credit for the stories that his artists like Jack Kirby and Ditko were telling, that he, I believe, only dialogued and wrote the captions, which is an art form in itself, but that's not the point. He credited himself as story written by Stan Lee, which to the reader and the layman means, oh, if you wrote it, that means you created it. And guys like Kirby and Ditko were credited as pencilers. I'll only give you one Kirby example. If we believe the urban comic book legend that sometime in mid-65, Lee calls up Kirby and says, hey, Jack, how about have the FF fight a really big villain next month? And this is the urban comic legend. What does Kirby do in his basement in Long Island in this little modest, little post-war American house that he had, where he created the Marvel Universe out of a basement in Long Island? What did he come back with after that alleged urban comic book legend phone call? He came back with the Galactus Silver Surfer trilogy. Now, Lee in his role as an editor, that's what editors do. They give what are called springboards to their creative staff. You brought up Weisinger. Over at DC Comics, they did things old school, written scripts by writers. Panel 1, Batman comes into the room. Panel 2, panel 3. And they gave them to artists like Dick Sprang, who drew him up. That was old school, pre-Marvel. But editors like Mort Weisinger and Julius Schwartz, they were men from the pulps from the 1930s. These guys were writers themselves. Do you know, not only did they give ideas for the stories to the writers, they would come up with the cover first and then give it to the writer and said, here, write a story around this cover idea. And then these guys were such polished editors, they would take the typewritten scripts by the writers and they would sometimes rewrite the whole script. But the point I'm trying to make is, in the decades that both those guys edited, their name never once appeared on a single byline of a single story of the thousands they edited, saying co-written by Mort Weisinger and so, co-written by blah, 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 and Julia Schwartz. And yet, what did Stan Lee do? He basically had the story drawn out for him like a silent movie on paper. And then in Lee's own words, he said, oh, then it was like filling in a crossword puzzle. There were also margin notes for dialogue by Kirby and Ditko. The point is Lee is the de facto 50% co-creator of Marvel Comics because the voice of the characters and the editorial voice of the comic itself is part of the comic book reading experience. That doesn't mean he created any of the characters or the stories. And that's a very subtle difference that most fans don't get. Most people that think they know the Kirby Lee situation, they're playing a zero-sum game where it's all or nothing. I give Lee his 50% of the credit for the things he actually did. But as an editor, Lee thinks because he said have the FF fight a really big villain, that means he created Galactus. Do you know the story of how MTV was created in 1981 at the dawn of, not MTV, Miami Vice? Do you remember this name, Brandon Tartikoff? He used to be the head of NBC back when they innovated that must-see TV Thursday night comedy lineup with the Bill Cosby show. This is what made, blah, blah, blah. But it was all Brandon Tartikoff. He was the president of NBC. What is his job? Every now and then, come up with an idea for a TV show. You're the president of NBC Entertainment. So, 81, MTV debuts. On a yellow sticky pad, he writes 2 words, MTV Cops. He hands that sticky pad to the writer-director Michael Mann, who in the early 80s had just come off a successful movie career in the 70s. In the 80s, he did that movie Heat with De Niro and Pacino, blah, blah, blah. The point is he ended up creating the TV show Miami Vice, which for a couple of years in the early 80s was the big kahuna. And it made Don Johnson a star, and everybody was wearing pastel colors, and, the soundtrack was MTV. The point is to his dying day, Tartikoff died young in the 90s, some disease. To his dying day, he said he created Miami Vice with those 2 words. And Michael Mann, to the day Tartikoff died, always refuted him and said, I don't give a F that you said it. I created Miami Vice, in other words.
Sad part is most people only recognize it from Grand Theft Auto.
The U.S. Copyright Office won't give you a copyright or trademark or something of a verbal idea. You can only get a trademark or a copyright, and I might not be right about the specifics here, if you have a tangible form of an idea.
It has to be you're right. It has to be a tangible something written down.
Something
you can't
that
just
you can look at basically with your eyes and see. You can't just say, I got an idea of how to wipe your ass after you take a dump. You got to draw out that toilet paper roll.
Write that down. Trademark.
You know that famous toilet paper roll?
Yeah.
My point is, if Stan Lee, Mr. Creator, wanted to write a novel called Spider-Man, a prose novel in 1962 about a kid that gets bitten by a spider, blah, 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 Uncle Ben, irony, the end. Guess what? He didn't. He worked in the comic book medium, which means until an artist figures out how to take any form of a script, whether it's a phone call, have the FF fight a really big villain, or it's an Alan Moore 25-page line for line explanation for a single panel for Dave Gibbons. He was notorious for that. But here's what laymen and non-artists don't get. If you give that 26-page description of a single panel to 10 different artists, guess what, folks? You're going to get 10 different interpretations, because writers complain, because I did this thing called the auteur theory of comics, where I patterned it on the auteur theory of film. Because before the 50s and the French critics who declared it's the director who is the author, i.e. auteur of the film. A screenplay are words on paper. Imagine the screenplay to 2001, A Space Odyssey, Monolith, Light Show. Are you kidding me? Until a director figures out how to turn words into something we call a movie, you don't have a movie. In comics, writers complain. I don't get it. If I tell an artist exactly what to draw, doesn't that mean I created it? And I'm like, I don't care how much you describe a visual image. An artist in comics has to be part choreographer, lighting director, art director, stage manager. He has to cast characters. Are you kidding me? And only non-artists and laymen, of course, don't get it. So what else is new? But it's the job of people like me to waste my precious time trying to educate the masses about the auteur theory of comics vis-a-vis the auteur theory of film.
But that's kind of where like through webinars, that's why you have such a nice.
If you had given Herman Mankiewicz a screenplay of Citizen Kane to Ed Wood to direct instead of Orson Welles, guess what? You would have gotten an Ed Wood film, a piece of crap, but it would have had some snappy dialogue.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and that's where I was telling everybody, especially through webinars. That's why when you watch it, you guys just got a nice, just a fraction of a taste in it. I mean, here's somebody who knows his stuff. I mean, it's not you didn't listen to him all. He's not sitting there, hold on a second, let me double check and make sure I have this fact right. He just went on a nice 10-minute, just straight. This is passion. This is stuff I am passionate about. This is stuff I know, and that's where I wanted to segue because, since we have unfortunately limited time with you, on the hour. So I wanted to share this next one because this is the other one that I've listened to and I've wanted to. Unfortunately, I can't zoom in on this.
Once again, that's an old graphic. That's not the current graphic. But
I'm going to go out negative.
Next week. Next week is a double header. Wednesday is Infantino at what time? 12:30 Eastern Standard Time. And Thursday is Kubert, 1:00 Eastern Standard Time.
Okay. This
is so my so-called European audience of fans with my tongue in cheek. Yeah, exactly, Chris. That's the exact response. I tried to, because I was doing these at night, and I figure, okay, maybe if we make them earlier, this so-called European audience. But when you buy a ticket to my webinars, New York Adventure Club has it set up that you can watch a recording of the webinar for a whole week afterwards anytime you want. So even if you can't see it live, you get the live recording, and then when you watch it at your own time, it's as if I'm doing it for you live right there. So it's the next best thing to being there in the moment with me, like you were today.
Yeah, that was what you just did. So yeah, so that's so I was bringing those up. So you have, and one of the things from modern comic stance, like for me, when I was born in 75. So when I really first started paying attention to comics and started understanding them I've always been a Marvel centered comic book. DC has always been kind of, for me, it was just, I think because I came into it so late, this is when Marvel was so far.
What age did you come in?
This would have been in the mid 80s when I really started.
Like 10 years old?
Yeah, so I would have been about 10.
So you got sucked right into the Marvel universe, or did you try DC?
I tried a little bit of it. I mean,
So what turned you off to DC, or what turned you on to Marvel?
Marvel, the one that I can really remember, and I'm a huge fan of, is Punisher. I have almost every one. And so
I like those early Mike Zeck, the artist Mike Zeck. I like those epics that he did.
Yeah.
Some breakout from jail and all that.
And the thing I wanted to really get to is like, especially with
how ironic that's really, I mean, in other words, he's not, quote, a superhero. He does represent, it's funny. I should have included him. This idea of the executioner comes from Ditko's question in Mr. A.
Yep. And that's kind of where I wanted to get to.
American pop culture vigilantes who take the law into their own hands. And basically, the Punisher is just a much more violent version of Ditko's archetype, which is basically judge, jury, and executioner.
Yep. He's like,
no. How ironic that I come from such a simpler time where we fell in love with superheroes versus the Punishers murdering bad guys. I mean, this is why I weep for your generation, that if you came in on, it's like, oy vey.
Well, that's, so you get to the modern ones, like one of the ones I wanted to touch on real quick, because in your, excuse me, in the Kubert webinar, you really touched on how he was able to, his characters talked to the audience. So you had one where they would engage with.
I mean, breaking the fourth wall.
Yeah, and that's where, for me, like Deadpool. Do you think that was an inspiration?
Hold on a second. Where did Kubert do that? I'm trying to think. Off the top of my head.
There was one where you had him where you could see that they were talking to
the viewer,
the audience, to the viewer.
I wish you could point out which ones you meant.
I'll try to. I'll think about it.
Rock is going, stop the war. I want to get out. Like, you mean stuff like that?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a form of kind of breaking the fourth wall. Yeah.
And that's,
I'm glad you picked up on that, because that was the change, that elevating an artist to the head of the editorial direction of the company, which is what they did with Infantino. He was their star artist. And he brought in concepts like that because they were losing ground to this upstart Marvel Comics, who eventually overtook them in the 70s, the early 70s. But in terms of media attention, DC was the establishment. Marvel was the counterculture, period. Case closed. And
you'll know this one.
That's the way they were perceived. So, my brother, he was such a Marvel Kirby guy. He was a year and a half older than me. But when he thought about DC, he liked the Julius Schwartz superhero books, The Flash, Green Lantern, Justice League, because they were like DC's kind of serious superhero line. And I use the word serious in quotes. But other than that, he thought the rest of DC's line was juvenile. And I remember as the younger brother looking at those Marvels, they were complicated looking to me, too many words. I liked what I called the banal simplicity of those Weisinger Superman books, which, like I said, for every 25 formula stories, there was always one gem that somehow made it through the Weisinger machine and is these stories that people still remember. Alan Moore is a prime example of somebody that grew up on those Weisinger and Julius Schwartz DC comics. And he's been, listen, Watchmen was basically him trying to do, that line of Charlton heroes that DC acquired the rights to. Mm-hmm. And he had to turn him into the Watchmen because whatever, DC wouldn't let him, mess with the actual characters. But the point is it's all about these Silver Age characters that we're still 50, 60 years later discussing. There's a Flash TV show in its 6th or 7th season now. And does the average person know who Carmine Infantino was? The artist who created the red-suited Flash and who depicted images of speed on a two-dimensional plane as great as any artist from the 20th century has ever done. In my lecture, I show a Carmine Infantino Flash image next to Marcel Duchamp's Nude Descending a Staircase, that famous image, which is considered, motion on a two-dimensional plane. That's how the fine art world looks at it. Well, I got the balls to put up an Infantino Flash right next to it and say, hey, It's Flash descending a staircase.
Yeah.
And I'm not judging one against the other or saying one is better. I'm just saying, to me, I use what I call the alien perspective. If aliens came to the earth and you showed them Michelangelo's Pietà, and then you showed them Jack Kirby's Pietà, which was this famous Thor cover where Odin is cradling a seemingly dead Thor in his arms. It's one of Kirby's greatest Thor images. You know, Kirby is like if you took Michelangelo and crossbred him with Picasso in his Cubist period. That's what Kirby's art is like. And if you showed those two images to aliens that weren't burdened by 400 years or 500 years of art theory criticism telling you this is great, but this sucks, I think they would look at the two images and go, oh, an Earth parent mourning their dead child. And they wouldn't have the value judgment that one is, quote, better than the other. But you see, if I show that in art history circles, it's blasphemous. I'd be kicked out. I would waive my recently gotten MFA. I'd say, but I got the sheepskin. They would still kick me out.
Yeah, I was trying to find that as you were talking there. I was trying to find that image. It was one of those.
So far, you're batting 0 on the accuracy of the images, by the way.
I know.
And I'm blaming Mo, Larry, and Curly collectively.
But hey, why
you're all
he didn't send me any.
I wanted to. You'll know about this one. Metal Men Comics was one of the old ones. I actually really loved that series. Do you think there's any
Ross
hope of that?
Andrews' greatest work. He was the most awkward cardboard figure artist in comics. How he ended up with Spider-Man, and I weep for the generation of Spider-Man fans, probably your age range, that came of age with the Ross Andrews Spider-Man. But how could the most awkward cardboard stiff-figured artist get the most live, flexible character? Always been a mystery to me. He made his deadlines, that's why. The point is what was he great at? Drawing robots. Yep. He drew awkward, stiff figures. So no wonder he drew the Metal Men is his as a comic book journeyman who had done the monthly grind for decades. Ross Andrews' greatest work, by the way, inked by his soulmate inker. Not every penciler has a soulmate inker. That's like a yin-yang. But the team of Andrew and Esposito is what made. Now, that is a Brian Boland homage to a Ross Andrew Esposito Metal Men cover. Do you realize that?
That was just one I grabbed real quick because I'm trying to make sure I don't get anything
your generation, that's what they do. They grab things. You know,
I just did that on purpose because I'm not even going to try to find the right one because
all
if
of my
I do,
criticisms are for the three of you because this is what I mean.
He's embarrassing.
When
He's
I
embarrassing.
was a kid, here's my old man story. When I was a kid, if we wanted the copy of something out of a book, we had to go to the library where there was one Xerox machine where we could take a book and Xerox a page and bring it home.
That's right.
Your generation has Google at the touch of a fingertip, but you don't have the powers of research and of attention to detail and observation and editing and sifting and discerning. Get with it, lad. And that goes for all three Stooges.
I'm not even going to try. I'm not even going to try to redeem myself.
You mentioned something. You mentioned something earlier. Why haven't you pushed that envelope to try to get a comic book documentary? I mean, you're very passionate about it, and just listening to you, you know a whole lot. I mean, so why haven't you?
Listen, I don't want to bore you, Chris, on the air about all of my attempts. One way I look at my career is like a wall. You know, you're supposed to throw SHIT at the wall and hope something will stick. My career, from my point of view, is a SHIT stained brick wall. All I got are downward streaks. And many of them are me trying to do a comic book documentary.
Wow.
I've been interviewed for comic book documentaries. I have proposals. What if I told you in 2004 when my Silver Age book came out, Ken Burns was giving a talk at the 92nd Street Y in Manhattan. Very prestigious. And it was whatever his recent documentary was in 2004, whatever he was doing at the time. And I went to see him in order to give him a book with a cover letter tucked in the book that basically said, hey, Mr. Burns, you've done every documentary about every American art form but comics. How about let's get together and discuss, I could be kind of a consultant or whatever I must have said in that letter. Anyway, at the end of the talk, he comes to the foot of the stage, and where the people kind of down below is like an elevated stage, and I guess he bent over to shake people's hands. So I reached up and I gave him a book. And I said, Mr. Burns, this is for you. Why don't we do a comic book documentary or whatever I blurted out? And this was his answer. He looked at me and he goes, why don't you do one? Yeah, thanks a lot, Ken Burns. That's like Rockefeller throwing a dime to the bums.
Wow.
Yeah, that's not exactly what I meant, Burnsy boy. Yeah, but my point is I have, in my limited scope of network connections, I've got proposals written up. I've got it down, baby. I just haven't either met the right people. You know, I'm on the East Coast. Maybe I should have been on the West Coast. Who knows? Life is full of what? Regrets. I've had a few. But then again, too few to mention.
Sinatra.
I got plenty to mention. I got some regrets.
We can't, like I said, now that we're at the halfway point, we have got to get to this because I know you're also super passionate about this one.
Oh.
Twilight Zone.
Yes, this for everybody. So, yep, this is like so. Before the show we were talking about this. Here I am, and this one I know this will be a little hot button for you because this is going to be the first. This is going to be the first introduction I ever had to the Twilight Zone. It is Jonathan Lithgow on an airplane looking at the creature.
But you poor boy. I only have a combination of pity and I guess mostly pity, Chris. I think it's just pity. It's pure pity. No offense, but I feel sad that is your introduction. And by the way, Lithgow and George Miller's version of Nightmare 20,000 was the best thing about that otherwise POS called Twilight Zone, the movie. And surprisingly, put together by Spielberg, who is a real child of Serling. And he did the TV movie Duel, written by Matheson, which is like a 90-minute Twilight Zone episode. And that's what got him Jaws. Because Duel was about a Mack truck chasing a car. And the guys that were putting together Jaws said, they took one look at Duel and they said, if this guy can get this kind of suspense from a Mack truck chasing a driver, I bet you he'd do pretty good with a mechanical shark chasing three guys on a boat. My point is, every remake of The Twilight Zone has sucked, including Jordan Peele's current one. There's only one original. It's like Coke original. There's no Coke classic. There's no Twilight Zone redos. There's only Serling's original. Sorry. It's like the Connery Bond. Every Bond post-Connery is some other character. You know, that's why, what's his name, came up with Jason Bourne. He wanted to do Bond, but he knew he couldn't own it. So what do you think? James Bond, Jason Bourne. Hello?
Yeah.
The point is only the first 4 Connery Bond movies that I recently did a webinar on, by the way.
Yep, we'll get
call it the Connery Bond canon. Those 4 films are James Bond. That's it. Done. There is no other James Bond. There's movies that are appropriating the name James Bond. But I knew James Bond, and you, sir, are no James Bond.
I'm going to light the other Arlen fuse here when we show the Twilight Zone's foray into doing monsters.
Wait, say it again?
When the Twilight Zone decided to go, and every time they tried to show a monster, how bad it was.
Okay, so the guy that wrote this episode, famous, Richard Matheson, famous science fiction writer, got You know, he did I Am Legend, which is the beginning of the whole zombie movie craze, blah, blah, blah. Richard Matheson. He wrote the second largest amount of Twilight Zone original scripts after Serling. He never forgave the Twilight Zone for 2 of his greatest episodes because of the way the so-called monsters look. That guy in the furry costume, Nightmare 20,000, do you know when he's outside on the wing and he bends over, you can see the vinyl soles of his feet? Like on pajamas, they got those vinyl soles. Are you feety pajamas? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
The
I'm
one
trying
you
to
slide across the floor with.
The Invaders episode with Agnes Moorehead, with the little Michelin men looking, you think they're little aliens. They look like Michelin men. You know what I'm talking about? That episode? Matheson never got it out of his system how much he hated with the way those characters looked. He thought they were ridiculous. He ended up rewriting that episode as the famous Karen Black 1971 TV movie called Amelia, where she's chased around a New York apartment by this little Zuni hunting fetish doll. Have either of you Three Stooges ever seen what I'm talking about? Let me tell you something.
I love it.
We should stop the podcast right now, because if you've never seen this 20-minute segment called Amelia, it's on YouTube, I'm sure. It's Matheson writing 10 years later a better version of the episode that he felt was ruined by the so-called monster. Here is the key about the Twilight Zone. Its greatest episodes were about the psychological, the dimension of imagination, what's in your mind, which every expert will tell you is more horrifying than anything you can physically create. And the greatest episodes are about a psychological type of horror, a surreal type of metaphysically changing of your world. And that's not dependent on special effects. You know, the greatest time travel episode, which is called Walking Distance, is about an adult, coincidentally Serling's age, who goes back in time and meets himself as a child and meets his parents. Now, do you think the Twilight Zone had it where all of a sudden the screen, you know, the famous cliche of the screen gets wavy and they go back in time? No.
Yep.
The director shows the actor Gig Young literally walking back in time by showing his reflection in the mirror at the gas station that he stops off at the beginning of the film. So kind of like Alice Through the Looking Glass, this is a director not assuming the audience are a bunch of idiots, that by showing him walking away through the mirror and then the camera goes like almost like a Stanley Kubrick, Steven Spielberg move, goes into the mirror. And that becomes the scene you're seeing. So that is the genius of the Twilight Zone. It was not about special effects. It wasn't about drippy, gooey monsters like everything is today. You kids with your newfangled, drippy, gooey monsters, why I oughta get off my lawn. You know what I'm trying to say is the greatest Twilight Zone episodes are up here, man. They work on the mind, man. And that's why it's brilliant. Whenever they did a so-called monster, the budget they had, they just looked ridiculous.
Well, that's like the first episode. If anybody, you can go back there.
By the way, every Outer Limits episode at the same time, and this is a newsflash to Outer Limits fans out there, every one of their monsters looked ridiculous. Every single Outer Limits monster was ridiculous.
Hey, but they controlled our vertical and our horizontal.
No, that was the greatest thing about it, that graphic opening, which owes to the great Twilight Zone graphic openings. I'm talking about the Outer Limits was about the monster of the week, or as their own creators called it, the bear. Every episode had to have a bear. Well, that was like every one of Twilight Zone's bad monster episodes every week. That was the Outer Limits. Not to mention they were padded, just like the Twilight Zone's own hour-long episodes. Big mistake. That half-hour form, which today's creators, they're all afraid of. Every single Jordan Peele new Twilight Zone, nobody did a half hour. Oh, all of today's creators, they need time to explore their genius ideas. Am I dripping with contempt enough?
Yes.
Boy, I'm watching the expressions of Larry and Curly over here, and it's like I'm stunning you both into submission.
You are.
I mean,
Tough
crowd. You know what I mean by tough crowd?
Oh yeah.
Tough crowd.
Yeah, is there, the list, it looks like your list, I've got a few that are kind of coincide. Like for me, one of those of your top episodes. Twilight Zone.
I have a list.
According to this one site, which I probably got another negative demerit, but he said this is Arlen.
I'll be the judge of that. Hey, don't get too big for your britches, Buster Brown. I'll be the judge of that.
Yeah, he said your number one episode was Where Is Everybody?
Okay. I think where they got it from was before I did one of my live visual lectures, as I call them, a year ago, to promote it on Facebook, I did a top 10 episodes counting down the 10 days before the live event. And I think I said at the beginning, these aren't necessarily in order of like the number one show is the best one. So Where Is Everybody? I might have put one because it was the pilot episode. I might have just organized, but really from 2 to 10, part of the problem is I don't have a top 10. There's too many great episodes. It's impossible. I really have it down to a top 25. I really can't even do a top 20. There's too many great episodes. Even a top 25, like an episode like Nightmare 20,000, I don't know if that made it into my top 25.
Based off the monster, I doubt it.
Well, but that's probably why.
Yeah, I thought Shatner's acting wasn't overly terrible in that one. I mean, I
listen, don't get me started on Shatner. He is the most underrated, great actor of our time because let me just set you straight here.
There's
every criticism that's been cliche leveled at Shatner is really what Adam West is guilty of.
Oh.
Adam West's acting as Batman is every criticism of Shatner's. If you actually watch Shatner on Star Trek, you're watching a great actor at work bringing a role to life as definitive as Connery's Bond. You realize that compliment I'm giving it?
Oh, yeah.
By the way, Connery was never given the credit of being a great actor until the 1970s. They never thought being Bond needed to be good acting. And yet, when he finally got the fame in the 70s, all of a sudden the critics go back to the Bond movies and go, now we can see Sean Connery's expert acting skills. F you. F you. Where were you when the films were coming out and you were basically saying anybody could be Bond? Yeah, guess what? Everybody after Bond proved Connery right. The point is, I forget what my point is. Where were we? Script girl.
We're talking about Shatner's acting skills.
The point is I have had it up to here with criticism of Shatner. Every criticism is meant for Adam West. Shatner is a great actor. Watch him on Star Trek. You know how many times he had to physically pantomime some alien force controlling his body, which everybody makes fun of? But let me tell you something. You watch those episodes, they've been on nightly reruns. I've been able to watch them all every night as my freelance lifestyle pandemic dictates. I've really been able to watch all 79 jewels, as Paramount refers to them as, really freshly. And let me tell you something. Shatner is a great actor that does not deserve any of these cliche, we've heard it a million times. Everybody's done their Shatner. Sorry, if you actually examine Adam West's role in Batman and the way he played it, that every criticism of Shatner's is applicable to the way West chose to play Batman.
Well, he did an amazing job in The Man Trap, when the creature was trying to suck the salt out of his face. So the part when he put the fingers on there.
Listen, that takes talent. Not everybody could do that.
Yeah, it's
Listen,
so,
listen,
you know,
Odd Job in Goldfinger went, Listen, it takes a lot to make these utterances.
yes,
Don't be so cavalier in your dismissal.
yeah. So I thought that was pretty good. It's in one. I know like you.
There are episodes where Shatner has to deliver a very philosophical Gene Roddenberry, Rod Serling type idealistic speech that's meant for the audience to teach them something. And Shatner pulls it off.
Well, you could see
He both preaches, but he's also James T. Kirk telling it like it is.
Wait, in kind of where we're talking about Star Trek a little bit is you can clearly see the inspiration that Gene Roddenberry got from Rod Serling.
He delivered the eulogy at Serling's funeral in 1975. He basically said, Star Trek would have been a glimmer in my eye had it not been for what Serling did with the Twilight Zone. Serling made the cloistered, sheltered, cultish world of science fiction, stories from the early 20th century, from the pulps, from H.G., all that stuff that wasn't considered real literature. And he brought it to an American medium called television. And by doing so, he made it safe for science fiction and fantasy for every future generation since. His metaphorical children are the Spielbergs, the George Lucases, the J.J. Abrams, the James Camerons. I'd say even Kubert owes. I compare one of his images from 2001 to the image of the Invaders. The spaceship on the barn roof is as out of place as a juxtaposition as the pod at the end of 2001 when it appears in that Victorian living room. That juxtaposition of old and future and past, Twilight Zone did it 8 years earlier. I call Serling in the Twilight Zone the father of American popular culture because I can trace any modern science fiction, fantasy, or horror product back to the Twilight Zone in less than 6 degrees of Rod Serling. And it doesn't mean Serling, again, he didn't invent time travel or other dimensions, other alternate worlds. Those were all science fiction concepts from the early 20th century. Edgar Rice Burroughs and Barnes. The point is there is nothing new under the sun. Every artist builds on what came before. Serling took his love of these science fiction cloistered, only the intelligentsia knew about them. I mean, Ray Bradbury was the most famous. But basically, most of the adaptations that made for great Twilight Zone episodes were not Ray Bradbury. He only did one Twilight Zone episode. The point, Serling was a master adapter. Some of the greatest Twilight Zone episodes, like the famous Time Enough at Last with Burgess Meredith, where he breaks his glasses that everybody remembers.
Yep.
Serling wrote that, but it was an adaptation of a short story, which many of the greatest Twilight Zone episodes and many of Serling's greatest episodes. And there's an art to adapting a prose story into a essentially 2-act play filmed for television, which is what those half-hour Twilight Zones were. 2-act plays filmed for television.
How crazy is it now that it'd have to get a mature rating?
Yeah, baby.
Because of him holding the cigarette. As he's sitting there doing
I was busy trying
Twilight Zone, I go, all those ones will have to get the warnings now on Netflix because of the cigarette. So as he's sitting here doing the talking, he's got the cigarette. Yeah, so you
Buzz. Any other depressing statements you got to make?
Yeah, so you get the warning now, contains smoking, and you're like, seriously?
Okay, next. Yeah.
So we got a question from
the guy died of cigarettes. Thanks a lot for bringing that up.
I know.
Any other, Debbie Downer statements you want to make?
Give me time.
Got a question from a good friend of ours.
You should be cutting in and cutting him off.
We got a question though. It's what about the Netflix series? I don't know if you've seen it. Toys That Made Us. Apparently, it has a really close relationship.
Toys That Made Us.
Yeah.
And it's about retro, all those old classic toys.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but one of our listeners have.
Say shows like Black Mirror on Netflix from England are a better homage to Twilight Zone than any of these official Twilight Zone remakes, because it's got more of a singular creative force, that guy Charlie Booker, whatever his name is. And the fact that he grouped Black Mirror under a single theme of technology gone awry gives the stories a creative force that I gave Jordan Peele 2 seasons, 20 episodes. And sorry, bud, but it's another thumbs down. Black Mirror, if for those listening in who haven't seen it, there's only about 19 episodes in 5 years or so. And I think they're all on Netflix. But to me, that's the only post-Twilight Zone homage to Twilight Zone that I feel succeeds creatively. All others suck. And if you notice, I don't mince my words.
Nope.
He said he sucked.
No, I got that.
I'll tell you if I think it's great, and I'll tell you if I think it sucks, and everything in between.
Yeah.
Telling it like it is, man, which is what I learned from people like Serling.
Now, are you a fan by any chance of Doctor Who?
No, I never got into him. And I think it's because it was an English thing, and it never really, like things like All in the Family and all the Monty Python made it here. Mm-hmm. Something about Doctor Who didn't penetrate to me. And listen, I missed a lot of things. I missed all of the Warren black and white magazines because I was such a superhero zombie. I mean, I missed a lot. You can't see everything. But we all miss a lot of great crap that we have to go back. And like I said, thank God for the internet. You can go back now in ways you never could before. And stuff that you literally had to go to New York City to find. You had to leave your part of the country and go to New York. Imagine.
Yep.
To get the real shit, man.
Now we got to get to the real important question.
It's worth it.
We got to get to the real important question before we let you go.
Ginger, did you hear me?
Huh?
Ginger, does he hear me?
Yeah, it broke up for a second.
Jeez. I said, thanks for if only one person laughs, it's worth it.
Hey, that's all that matters.
Well, there you got 3. No, we got to get to the important one. So, as we got just a couple minutes here.
So Chris is like the bodyguard, waiting at the door, making sure nobody's.
I know, looking back and forth, making sure.
What Chris's role in this little triumvirate is.
I'm a shenanigator. I'm quiet tonight because you're
like a lookout right now.
What did I do? Did I bully you into submission?
I don't know. You're very interesting. You're very interesting. So I don't want to cut you off. So I'm just listening.
No, I was taught in school never to use the word interesting to describe something. Why? Because I'll never forget. It had to be my 4th or 5th or 6th grade teacher. She said, "Tell us what about it is interesting." In other words, the word interesting by itself literally means nothing.
You know your stuff. You know from every comment.
Chris, just take it in to actually say what is interesting. Very simple.
Your whole camaraderie with knowing every comic from back to front. You can describe here the artist, the titles, everything. That is, that's very.
Thanks, man.
If I may say, interesting. You need a documentary.
No, I just told you. Go to the back of the class. Just because you have a beard, go to the back of the class. Yeah. So
we need to have you on again. So follow up.
Anytime, man. I'm telling you, I'm too much information, man. I'm TMI. You can't fit me in. We only scratch the surface. Listen. Most people only know sort of one thing. I've got multiple pop culture children. You know how you're not supposed to know which one you love the most? If we're talking comics, I get into my comic mode. Twilight Zone mode. Bruce Springsteen, my rock and roll history mode. And then I just did a webinar on the Bon Connery films. I did one on the Fleischer Superman cartoons. I got a lot of pop culture interest, but it's all the stuff that I grew up with. It's all the stuff that I was blessed with by growing up in northern New Jersey and getting that New York media, things like the Three Stooges, and Little Rascals. You know, Little Rascals taught my generation of white kids more about equality and prejudice and things like that from these Little Rascals episodes where Buckwheat and the other black kid, what was his name? Buckwheat, and there was like another black kid, that were equals. And as a kid, when you're seeing this and you're laughing and you're seeing that they're being treated as equals by the other Little Rascals, this is what taught a whole generation of liberal baby. I'm on the tail end of the baby boom. But, you know, the reason why Vietnam and the civil rights movement was able to get that injection from white suburbia is because of that media by people like Rod Serling, most of them Jews, by the way, laying down why the Jews supported the civil rights movement because of the shared history of slavery. Blah, 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 blah. Jack Kirby, Yaakov Kurtzberg creates Black Panther. Most black people don't know that their favorite superhero was created by Yaakov Kurtzberg. By the way, I'm doing a lecture on Jews and comics next month on I think September 16th, right before Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. So I will school you on the origins of the Black Panther by Yaakov Kurtzberg, Chris.
Sure. I was going to bring up an image, but I'm not even going to try because I'm going to fail. I'll get something wrong. No.
What'd you say, Chris?
No, I said I was going to get it. I was going to pull up an image real quick, but I'm not even going to do it.
He's been wrong all night.
You know, when you go back to edit this podcast, can you actually put in the correct images? Yeah, exactly. Enough said, as Stan Lee would say.
And the next round, I'll try to step up my game, sir. I apologize, but
didn't I send you ahead like a couple of emails?
Email him to us so he can have the correct images.
But didn't I this past week or 2 weeks? Didn't I send you like emails of the things? Yeah, you still got it.
I told you. I told you.
Okay, Chris and Ginger Squatch, get on it. If you're going to have me on again, I'm going to go through the trouble of sending you the right images.
I'm sure you did. I just probably, like I said, clicked the wrong thing. The
important thing for people for my webinars is nyadventureclub.com. As long as they go to their site, they'll find my webinars because my graphics don't look like anything else. Everything else is like walking tours of New York City. Everything's virtual now as a webinar, but you'll recognize the things I'm doing. But next week is a double header of Infantino and Kubert. The week after is Twilight Zone and the Age of Corona. In September, Jews and Comics, Bruce Springsteen's greatest single show, Roy Lichtenstein, the eternal enigma of Roy Lichtenstein, and September 30th, the 60th anniversary of the Flintstones, and October 2nd, the 61st anniversary of the Twilight Zone. Can you deal with it? Can you handle all that truth? You can't handle the truth.
So, arlenschumer.com.
Yes.
Got that right. Go there. Check him out. He has got all the information for all these webinars.
nyadventureclub.com to buy a ticket to my webinars.
Yep, and I'll post that up there again just so everybody can see. And
now, where are you? You're in Oregon now?
No, we're all three of us are in Central Florida.
Central Florida.
Oh, you're all in Florida. Oh, so we're all on Eastern time. Okay, I didn't know that. Why did I think you were out in Oregon?
And before the show, we were talking about that's where I grew up.
Right. That's, you see, good memory.
Yep. That's apparently, except for trying to get the right images.
But I thought the beer.
We're not going to talk about
that from the Northwest.
That's kind of.
Okay, so how did you guys meet? Are you guys old friends? Like, how did you guys hook up like this?
We all work at the same place.
What place?
We work for a municipality that we're not supposed to talk about on air.
Okay. Don't worry. The secretary will disavow all knowledge of your actions.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we.
So you met in real life, working someplace, and you realized you had shared interests, and you stayed in touch,
and decided to do a show
podcast together.
Yep.
Yeah, that's about the size of.
How long have you been doing Three Beards podcast?
We started in September.
And let me ask you something. I know this sounds like cliche, but can you make any real money doing these podcasts? Are you getting advertising and all that stuff?
Yeah, we when we started the show, Rod Beard Care, he's actually our primary sponsor.
But I'm saying, like, is this a thing where you can actually make a little coin on the side?
Mm-hmm.
Try to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, he, Brought and Nanny Cakes, a cake maker here in the local Central Florida area. That's enough to cover the costs for running the show, and then we started Patreon, and then on that, if we can get
I can gain income by more and more listeners and all that stuff.
yeah, join Patreon.
More listeners.
Listen, exploit me, use me, and abuse me to get ratings, and make people come to my webinars. Whatever I can do to help you guys, help me. We're all on this earth to help each other. God damn it!
You got it. Well, I'm not going to say. I've already said it once. I snuck it in
My
there.
life with this has been whenever I've gotten Ginger to laugh. Whenever I've gotten him to laugh, more than Chris. Whenever I've gotten Ginger to laugh, I know I've accomplished something.
There you go. Very well done. But hey, Arlen, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Aside, we only scratch the surface of these things, but anytime you want to have me on, especially based on whatever I'm doing webinar-wise, if you want to talk about that subject in order to get people to buy tickets to come to the webinar.
Oh yeah, I mean we barely scratched the surface of the comics, and then we still have Bond. We still
New York Adventure Club. Keep up, Facebook friend me, all that stuff, because I post everything I'm doing on my Facebook page. I'm on Instagram and all that, but Facebook is where I get the most feedback, which I enjoy. It's never enough for me, but Facebook at least gives me a little give and take. But on my website, there's a blog page where I always have my latest current event. So like starting tomorrow, I'm going to promote the fact that I'm going to be at the Serling Fest on Saturday doing a 1-hour version of my almost 3-hour Twilight Zone webinar at the end of the month.
That's great.
So I'm promoting that on social media. So just connect with me and let's stay in touch. And guys, fun meeting you. And it was over much too soon. Just like the sex that I haven't had in over a decade, if not more. Yeah, you like that little person?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I couldn't ask for a better way to end it right there. There we go. So all right.
We top that, Chris.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Sir, what are you doing? What is that?
My damn dog knocked my camera over. I had to fix my camera.
American flag. What are you posing for Born in the USA?
Yes.
Okay, boys. Well,
all right. Well, have a great night.
Nice meeting you all, and I hope to see you down the road. Come to my webinars. You'll love them. I'll blow your mind. Craig, did I not blow your mind today?
Oh, yeah. It was 2 hours before you knew it. An hour and a half went by. It was crazy. Yeah.
You've never seen anything like that. Nobody's ever shown comics the way I show them.
No, definitely not.
Never seen them that way.
Tell it to the masses. Get the info. Listen, just to let you know, this guy Corey from New York Adventure Club, if I don't get enough people for these next 2 comic book webinars, he doesn't want me to do any more comic book themed webinars. He only wants me to do other pop culture, which he feels has more of an audience. And listen, it's his business. He's kind of my partner. But I can only do what he approves. And he's basically saying, Arlen, we're not getting enough people to come to your comic book webinars. And
we'll try.
I can't believe I've got 3 groups with thousands of members, and I only get 40 people to show up to a goddamn webinar. And it's only $10 a ticket. I mean, it's not an expensive ticket.
No,
it can't be the money. But man, getting people off their asses to just come to my webinars, and they're people you would think they're in my groups for the subject matter that I'm doing the webinar about.
I know. It's crazy.
It's frustrating.
Yeah. All right. Well, we got to run.
Hey, boys. Nice meeting you.
Take care. Have a great night, and we will.
By the way,
soon.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Definitely.
The only time I'll quote the previous worst president ever. Mission accomplished.
There you go. There. All right. Well, that's as close to politics as we'll touch.
Ever. And on that note, boys.
All right. Have a great night.
Let's do it again.
All right. All right, this episode was brought to you by Bratz Beard Care. Go to bratzbeardcare.com and enter promo code 3beards with a capital B, and you're going to save 20% off your order, along with free shipping. And check out our signature blend on there. You buy a bottle of that. Not only are you supporting Kelly, local craftsman, you are also going to support us at the same time. Go to Nanny Cakes, Nancy Burke, and Nanny Cakes 407. It's 407-923-2898. Mention 3 Beards, and you're gonna save on your cake purchase here in the Central Florida area. And everybody, we talked about a little bit. Patreon.com/3 Beards podcast. Become a Patreon member, support us. That helps us out, as well as you're gonna get cool things along like stickers when we create them. And go to YouTube, subscribe that, hit notification bell, so whenever we have an episode, you will get notified. So everybody, Arlen, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. Everybody, thanks for watching, and we will see you later on. We'll talk to you later. Bye.